All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for this, our first webinar of 2024 for LIASA IGBIS, your interest group for bibliographic standards. My name is Sarah Golby, the IGBIS Public Relations Officer. I'm standing in here for Misha Moriana, our IGBIS chair, who was unfortunately unable to join us this morning. Before I introduce our guest, Mr. Setlabo Phala, I just want to remind you that the session is being recorded and it will be uploaded to the LIASA News YouTube channel. The link will be emailed to all registered attendees and we'll also be sharing it on our IGBIS social media pages. We look forward to your questions and comments on Setlabo's presentation. You're welcome to type these into the chat or Q&A boxes. You may also raise your hand during the Q&A, moderated by the IGBIS Secretary, Ingrid Henrici, and we'll unmute your microphone so you can voice your question. During the Q&A, I'll also be posting a link to a feedback form in the chat box. We would really appreciate your thoughts and impressions of this morning's session, as this helps to guide our future webinars and events. So this morning, I have the pleasure of introducing our guest speaker and a fellow National Library colleague, Setlabo Phala. Setlabo will be presenting an introduction to digitized collections and metadata in the library, and the processes and steps involved in ensuring a successfully curated collection. A familiarity with digitized collections management ensures that catalogers can guide and support project leaders and staff in creating fully realized metadata records that support accessibility and data integrity. Setlabo is passionate about technology and its benefits to the library and information services profession. He has worked in multiple roles, including reference librarianship, archives management, and is currently seconded to be the Intermediary Digital Curation Officer at the National Library of South Africa's Pretoria campus. He has presented papers on the integration of robotics and artificial intelligence in information institutions to improve library services, and many of you may recognize Setlabo from his presentations during the last two LIASA conferences. So without further ado, I welcome Setlabo Phala.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for the lovely introduction. It's such an honor to be here, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen just now, and I'll just get into the presentation. Yes. Hoping everyone can see my screen. It shows that everything is working well. Good day, everyone. I'm excited to be part of the discourse about metadata. We have had much conversations about the metadata management and digitization of digitized materials even before the emergence of the fourth industrial revolution. And it is exciting to just break down the abstract concepts into a manageable understanding of an approach of descriptions of our acquired digital material. Not only will we be describing the physical items we have, but it's also paramount to have a system to describe the digital versions of those items or the newly acquired digital versions. Just to get into an overview of the presentation. So the presentation boasts about metadata as one of the most significant costs of digitization. Although archival items are digitized without cataloging, a digital collection cannot be created and delivered without metadata. The key retrieval processes of items rely on metadata, And this is no different within a digital space. Within the presentation, I'll get into the purpose of the metadata in context of digitized collections, importance of the metadatας for digital preservation, the key challenges involved in the process, recommendations, and summary. There is a surprise, a bit of a name drop in the presentation as well. So I'm hoping to get much discussions about it. Just to clarify, this presentation is just an introductory overview of what metadata librarians need to consider before embarking on publishing digitized images with metadata, or just digitized materials as a whole. There's an excellent video on how to format and input content into specific fields of the metadata record, and it is available on YouTube. It is a 35-minute video and covers why metadata is important, the basic metadata fields, using controlled vocabularies, and using spreadsheets for metadata. Not only that, and also considering other forms of data management, including but not limited to managing large amounts of data and migrations and so forth. Okay, let's get into the definitions. So we start with metadata. We all know, or it's widely understood that it is just data about data, and it is expected to provide information about other material that we have in the library. The author contends that the structured information that describes, explains, and locates otherwise makes it easier to retrieve, use, and manage an information resource. This should be an important segue to consider as we get into the purpose of our metadata management. The metadata should streamline the retrieval process of materials and also ensure that we can store and retrieve those materials in a very simple way without issues. Also to prevent loss or to be able to manage migrations if necessary in an easy way. The United States National Information Standards Organization definition is more specific, and it's the one I just mentioned down, that it helps retrieve and locate otherwise an information resource. But the French have a context that goes more into the digital object. They simply say that the digital object is not the same as the document, but it is a scientific sample of an object. Hence, the metadata that describes the physical object, its MAC record, may have similarities to the digital one, but their purposes and structure may be different. Let's get into metadata types now. There are different metadata types which act as a broad category. For example, there are descriptive, technical, rights, administrative, preservation, or structural metadata. Metadata types are informed by the metadata standards. These standards consist of established schemas such as the MAC, machine readable cataloging, AACR2, RDA, XML, which is extensible markup language, also the Open Archives Initiative. Metadata schemas are supported by controlled vocabulary such as the Library of Congress subject headings, which is widely used. The judicious use of control vocabularies and taxonomies can enhance access for various types of user groups. Later on in the presentation, there will be an exploration of challenges that come up when you have to choose a metadata standard to use in your library. If any person were to just develop their own way of describing items that they have in their collection, then it would be difficult for integration of libraries across institutions. So you'd find that people cannot locate the data because they are not regulated in the way they describe the data for ease of access within the controlled community, if I could say. The digital metadata standards have been developed to make it easier for users to negotiate between the information objects and digital versions of the objects themselves, and to search at both the item and collection levels within and across information systems. It includes schemas such as Dublin Core or Dublin Core, the metadata element set of 15 core elements or properties for describing resources that has been formally standardized as ISO 15836. It is widely used for digital collections. The second one is EAD, Encoded Archival Descriptions, which is an XML standard for encoding archival finding aids. The third one is MODS, Metadata Object Description Schema. It was designed as a compromise between the complexity of MARC format used by libraries and the extreme simplicity of the Dublin Core metadata. The MET schema is a standard for encoding descriptive, administrative, and structural metadata regarding objects within a digitized library. And lastly, the premise data dictionary for preservation metadata is the international standard for the metadata to support preservation of digital objects and to ensure their long-term usability. So why are there so many different schema beyond the basic library metadata standards? It is because of the purpose. So each institution within the different institution types, be it the libraries or archives or even types of libraries, might have unique needs in terms of describing their digital collections for better curation. Mother Barker succinctly surmises that the purpose of metadata in the context of digital and digitized collections, she says that it does not equal access. The mere act of creating digital copies of collections does not make those materials findable, understandable, or utilizable for our ever-expanding audience of online users. But digitization combined with the creation of carefully crafted metadata can significantly enhance an end-user access, and our users are the primary reason we create digital resources. So if we do have a certain object that is just curated on our website, without metadata, it wouldn't mean anything towards anyone. A perfect example is the early an early exercise that we do in team buildings, where a figure that looks like an E or a 3 is drawn on the ground and people are placed in a circle around it. So if you ask each person in the group, depending on the angle in which they're looking at the E or the 3, they'll tell you that it's a different thing. And this is predominantly because us as human beings will develop our own meanings if there's no meaning attached to something. Hence, context is needed when curating your images within a digitized collection. You cannot just place a newspaper, for example, without metadata on who published it, when was it published, which subject does it fall into, and so forth. The same information that you use to provide context can now streamline the information searching process. A person does not have to score through the clutter, if I could say, in their context to find the desired information. Instead, these people can just go straight to the information that they desire. Now, let's get into the FAIR principles. You have described your data. Now, how do you evaluate if your descriptions are effective? And I present to you the FAIR principles. The FAIR principles, FAIR being an acronym standing for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, are obviously related, but technically somewhat independent from one another. They may be implemented in any combination incrementally. As such, the barrier to entry for FAIR data producers, publishers, and stewards is maintained as low as possible. So you have followed strict schemas towards describing your information, and you've chosen the best schema for your collection. Now, your evaluation doesn't have to be as strict. The test in which you develop for each of the letters in the acronym is largely dependent on your user needs that you have established earlier on. However, just to explain each one, to say that information is fair, it should be easily findable, meaning a simple search term or a simple keyword search must be able to locate that information that you need. It should be accessible, meaning the data that you provide, if they are paywalls, as a curator or as a library, you have the responsibility to ensure that users can access that otherwise restricted information. And this is done through purchasing licenses in other libraries, but more recently, the open access movement also provides much more support and discourse around accessibility of materials or information in that regard. It must be interoperable, meaning you must be able to use it across platforms, and also it must be able to be easily transferred from one system to the other. So meaning whatever you describe must be able to be exported in simple terms, and also it must integrate with other systems that may be related to your access. And lastly, the data must be reusable. We can see a simple example that has been practiced so far with the OCLC's function of copy cataloging, where you can import a certain record and then you continue to fill out whatever may be missing with the version of the book that you have or the material that you have. When developing metadata, it is imperative to note that that information must be retrievable by both the staff, meaning however you may have described the data within the back end must be easily accessible for staff, and however you do it for the front end must be easily accessible for users. So sometimes one cataloging schema may work for that, but in other terms, depending on the systems you use, for example, which I'll get into more later, if you are using different types of servers, you may find that the naming schema is not the same as the one that you would use for the front end, where you would use more structural or more schemas that have been established earlier on in the presentation. Considering this, metadata management can also be an integral part for the open access movement, as the practice streamlines the searching and retrieval process. After this, I'm just going to get into the context of using the metadata within the digitization project by just sharing our standard operating procedure with everyone. So what happens usually is that you have to ask yourself, where does metadata creation fit into the digitization process? And then I would relate that answer to what we do here. So the NLSA digitization workflow has 5 distinct phases. Firstly, the scanning, the archiving of the for preservation and access, the metadata recording, publication of items with metadata descriptions, and online public access management. As you can see, as you can see that there's a workflow of documents that are scanned, either it's books, newspapers, and so forth. Those documents are stored with the TIFF format, that stores the images in their highest, the highest quality, and that is mostly clear and can last for a long time. And then they're uploaded within our deep archives, which is our servers, and PDF archives, depending on the format in which you are using. And then TIFF files are stored for preservation, as I mentioned just now, that they last for a long time. And then they're stored by year, issue, and stored for copying conversion. So usually if we have to prepare certain material towards a client, we wouldn't provide them in a TIFF format because most conventional programs cannot open that format. So we have to convert it to a more usable format, which is PDF. And this enables us to add additional features that may enhance the searchability of the item, including the OCR, meaning being able to identify objects, even in old materials or old books. Systems now can recognize the text, and you can not only search for the book, but search for specific words within the book after the digitization project. And then now the technical metadata is added to the file description at the scanning phase. During metadata recording phase, as a metadata record similar to the hard copy's bibliographic record is created and linked to the image file. As you can see from step 3 there, metadata records are then created and then they're submitted onto our OCLC content DM server. And then those records are linked to the bibliographic one. The items are then published on the digital collections website, the one in the OCLC server, and then public viewers can now access those digital collections. Marita's also here, our systems librarian. I think maybe during the discussions, she can even bring more conversation into how that is done. But basically, this answers the context of why metadata is important. The metadata stage, how it fits into the digitization process. Now, the importance of metadata for digital preservation. So the first one is that it assists discovery and access in addition to full text searching that I just explained, including searching across multiple collections and the creation of virtual collections of material distributed across several repositories. It is an easy mode for transfer and sharing, and it helps maintain the digital records for the future. The Getty Research Institute published the 3rd edition of a book called The Introduction to Metadata, edited by Martha Barker in 2016. A chapter called Setting the Stage by N.J. Gilead explains the following. Metadata also with retention of context, archival and library repositories do not simply hold objects. They maintain collections of the objects that have been complex interrelationships and a variety of associations with people, places, movements, styles, and events. In the digital world, it is not unusual for a single object from a collection to be digitized and for that digital surrogate to become separated from both its own cataloging and information, while the descriptive data and its relationship to other objects in the same collection, resulting in a decontextualized information object. Metadata plays a crucial role in documenting and maintaining important relationships, as well as indicating the authenticity, the structural and procedural integrity, and the degree of completeness of information objects. It also speaks about multi-versioning, the ability to create multiple and variant versions of information objects as they may be as simple as creating both high-resolution copies of a digital image for preservation and scholarly research uses, and a low-resolution thumbnail image that can be rapidly transferred over a network for quick reference purposes. There must be metadata to relate the multiple versions of a given information object and to capture what is the same and what is different about each version. Then now getting into the legal issues or the ethical considerations, metadata allows repositories to track the many layers of rights and licensing and the reproduction of information that exists for original items, as well as their related information objects and the multiple versions of those information objects. Before I get into the preservation and persistence, I want to speak about these three perspectives that have been provided by Getty and others. The simplest example you can consider when doing this is that sometimes as librarians, you have to display books or materials to pique the interest of the users. If you just take an interesting image within a book, the context of that image changes. And it is up to the metadata to link that image towards the actual book in order to ensure that whoever is interested in that image can now go back and explore the full context that comes from the book. And it is the same within the digital objects that have been identified in this perspective. Having that thumbnail may pique interest, but it is developed, it is pulled from something. And the metadata works in a way that it links that original material towards the thumbnail or the object that we use for displaying or piquing interest. And then now let's get into the preservation and persistence. If digital information objects that are currently being created are to have a chance of surviving migrations through successive generations of computer hardware and software or removal to entirely new delivery systems, they will need metadata that enables them to exist independently of the system that is currently being used to store and retrieve them. The technical description and preservation metadata that documents the technical descriptive and preservation metadata that documents have in a digital format or a digital object was created, is now created, maintained, and how it behaves is monitored, and how it relates to other information is also essential. There are few reasons for that are provided for why metadata is important for digital preservation. I would recommend that you read up on those on the website that is provided, or you consult the book. Now let's get into the key challenges. The first one is context and content. According to Zan, those are the most significant challenges that archivists need to address when making archival data more shareable. Context requires a reasonable balance between sufficient context data and full multi-level descriptions, but sharing content goes to an item level description. What it means is that the description that you consider when providing context would be related towards the collection that you are placing an item in. But when you are when you are describing content, it's now item specific because each item has different descriptions of their content. An example would be exclusion of a collection name that is essential to make sense of the record. So if you are going to say, you provided an item that has Nelson Mandela's speech, but you're not mentioning that this is the Nelson Mandela collection, and it's just a title, for example. A lot of people may not relate that speech towards the icon, and let's say people who are enthusiasts of Mandela may be not able to understand the context of that speech. Well, identify which metadata schema or schemas would be applied in order to best meet the needs of the information creator. Should be applied in order to best meet the needs of the information creator, repository, and users. Deciding which type of metadata are essential for the desired goal and how granular each type of needs can be. The example would be the inclusion of technical information in the metadata records, such as the date, digitized, and the type of scanner used. So here, we are ensuring that the controlled vocabularies, thesauri, and taxonomies, including taxonomies, are being applied to the most up-to-date complete versions of those sets of data values, and that there are appropriate terminologies for the materials being described for intended users. Now, when we are recontextualizing, we're renaming, retitling, and reattributing objects due to cultural sensitivity, long-term storage migration. For example, objects that are identified in a single collection but are used individually for exhibitions, or museum objects that may be renamed for reattributed and assigned different creation dates because the new documentation has come to light. Lack of consistency in the application of standards and lack of conformance. We may experience more challenges in terms of having lack of consistency in application of standards and conformity towards the standards as well. Another challenge is the lack of experience and support to metadata librarians. A very specific skill set is required for metadata creators for digital content. I think most of people who are here can attest to how accurate the information must be in order to ensure that the metadata, the items are stored in a proficient way, meaning quality checks are done now, and you may find that in certain instances, staff doesn't have the required quality assurance staff, a member that can oversee the metadata that has been created or being shared. Fortunately, as a rule of excellent support and guidance, excellent support and guidance are available from digital collections management systems service providers. For example, if you were to implement RDA, there is an online forum that can support for that if you don't have an internal person that will do that quality check. But it is something to consider when applying or embarking on a metadata project. Lack of information about the objects. So sometimes photographs or 3D artifacts may be too abstract for you to just develop metadata. And as I've mentioned, context changes a lot of things about the object that you are describing. So if you don't have enough information, then it becomes an issue to describe that item because maybe the information that is provided there may be inaccurate. Now let's get into the recommendation. It is advisable that a person thoroughly strategizes before initiating any development of a digital repository aimed at facilitating the exploration of digital content. It is also advisable to invest in additional time and exploring optimal methods for the cataloging and consulting guidance from institutions and experts to discern the most suitable approach for both the institution and users. You may do this looking at the digital collections management system, for example, DSpace or Content DM. It all, like here you can even explore the kind of repository that you're going to store your data, and the function for it. For example, if you're going to do a research repository, it's also imperative that you also consult with Figshare to see how, if you're considering Figshare anyway, how the data may be curated in that regard. You must also consider the metadata schema or standards that would be the most suitable for your collection, for the users that you have. So the types of users also determine how the data may be described. You cannot use more technical terms for general public. You can describe that this book is like that, but make it more relatable for other users. But in a specialized library, like a law library or a science library, more technical terms that are even scientific may not be difficult for those users to be able to access the object. The metadata types with templates for each collection. So you must also consider the types of metadata, as I've mentioned them earlier, whether it's going to be descriptive, authoritative, so forth, for each types of template that you have in your collection. Also, as a side note, you can also integrate AI in the management systems to streamline the process. This is a presentation on its own, but just to give an overview for that, you may include AI in different forms of the metadata, either for the creation of metadata and then the staff member works towards overseeing the quality checks, or vice versa. You find that the AI can in real time track your metadata contributions along with other capabilities it may have, like developing relationships between collections that you may have, or the types of collections that you may put there within your metadata. If you say that this is the Nelson Mandela collection, and then you have a Thabo Mbeki collection, for example, AI can also streamline the process by showing the relatability of the two collections, or doing suggestive content towards the search, inside the search engine, for users to say, if you were interested in Thabo Mbeki, for example, here's a Steve Biko collection, which may also enhance the discovery process. You can also have a quality management function within the workflow. I've been speaking about quality management for a while now, so I'm not going to expand more on that. But more importantly, no man is an island. Join communities of practice or user groups to learn about the environment. Most ideas are developed from other ideas. So having forums like this one is a great opportunity to see what other institutions are doing, and that may inspire a certain standard operating procedure to be developed for your own. And it's also imperative that when you develop it, you share your own on platforms like this one, and it may bring out a brainchild for the generations to come. Now, to conclude my presentation, we should just note that there's no one-size-fits-all metadata schema or type for controlled vocabulary or cataloging. When it comes to describing digitized items, there's the sky's the limit, if I would say, or you have to consider each one, weigh out the pros and cons of each schema and see how it would apply best to your collection. Carefully crafted metadata results in the best information management and the best end user access in both short and long term. So if you've done it properly, it should be easy to store for preservation and also enhance the retrieval process for both staff and users. Here are my references, and I thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you very much, Setlabo. Are there any questions? The floor is open for questions, so please feel free to pose your questions. You can either put them into the Q&A or the chat, or you can raise your hand.
I see there's one hand up from Linky Ramapoko.
Go ahead. Please, can you pose your question? Okay, so there is in the chat, there's a question from Fatima. Are there any initiatives for training on premise or other preservation metadata standards?
Sorry, I was struggling to unmute. Not that I know of so far. Let it just be an evocative way of us just searching on the platforms to see what may be available for training. Remember now that we're living in a digitized world, you can easily just search premise on the internet and see if there are any trainings that they'll be doing, or explore other international forums like IFLA to see if they are there. But as of so far, not that I know of. If I did see something, I would just share with everyone.
Okay. Then there's another question that says, which AI tools can be used for metadata?
Okay. So far, with the ones I know, there's no direct implementation of AI tools that I know that I can name drop. However, the research that I've done so far with the different types of AIs that are out there shows that developing an API and programming it towards the usage functions that you require in the library may enhance those subjects that I mentioned. So, for example, if you are interested in Gemini, you can purchase the API for your organization. And if you have someone who knows Python coding or any form of coding that may be integral towards your system's development, it can now be integrated for those functionalities. That's the suggestions that are found with the research that is out there. The experimental systems are part of another presentation that I saw last year at Liasa. When I get back the name, I can share with Sarah that platform, and it can be included as part of the slides just for further reading.
Okay. Then there's a question from Marika, and she asks, are there open access controlled vocabularies in subject fields, excuse me, in subject fields that are integrated into a collection management system?
Open access is still a fairly new practice, if I could say. The open science movement is still focused more in terms of ensuring access towards the users. However, in the discourse that is had around open science or open access movements, they do encourage the ensuring that the quality control is done in a way that enforces or encourages collaboration within institutions. If anyone has attended any open access movement event, you can see that if we're speaking about using RDA for the optimal access, then we would have a forum where it encourages more people to use it within this way to ensure that you can ensure that people can search or people can organize information in the same or in a similar way that would enhance the sharing or the interoperability between different institutions. Yeah.
Setlabo's mic has been muted.
You couldn't hear me just now?
No, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, okay. Let me just repeat what I've said. I simply said that within the open access movement, there is discussions on existing schemas and how to use them to enhance the collaboration, if I may say. The movement itself is more focused around the issue of paywalls and things like that, and encouraging more researchers to write in a way or publish in a way that would ensure optimal access, and the ethical considerations of costs and other things are considered there. However, in terms of metadata, there is an encouragement to ensure that there's more adherence in terms of similar practices if we're speaking about specific schemas. So if you're saying we're using RDA, those debates that may have about certain fields within the RDA may be streamlined with the participating organization within an open access forum.
Yeah. So I see there's a comment here or in the chat from Nicholas Zimmer that there is a Mika S that can import many open thesauric and controlled vocabularies and metadata schema. That is also quite an useful system. All right, there's some more questions. Zandile asks, what are the pros and cons of digitizing for preservation?
Okay, the pros are the preservation itself. Well, let's start there. I'll just want to share something with what we have here. So we have a certain book, if I could say, that shows where the newspapers, historically old newspapers up to the 1800s, where they are stored. A good practice for digitization for that book would be to make a copy of it available online, because if, for example, there's a disaster here at the NLSA, I can note the fire that happened in Cape Town, regrettably. You may find that if the servers or if things are stored in the cloud storage, you can still retrieve that information or reprint the book for ease of access. But as of now, right now, having just the book is a risk itself. So digitization provides that as a pro. It also provides less costly mechanisms of storing for long-term information. For example, now when we store books and newspapers, they often have to be deacidified. You have to have robust client control systems, ensure the preservation of those items. You have to have space, which is a big issue in our libraries. Space is a big issue. So to free up space, you can also use digitization for that. The cons may be you're also susceptible to digital attacks. People may hack your system, hold it ransom, and you have to pay handsome amounts of money just to retrieve your server if it's not secure enough. The other issue may be malware, viruses, and so forth that can threaten your collection. the third con may be reusability of certain formats decreases the quality of the products over time. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So there's another question here. What role does metadata play in data discovery and analysis?
For data discovery, it provides succinct terms for you to be able to locate the items. So if a title is this way, it will be directly translated towards the search engine that you're using to locate the data. So also the keywords and so forth. Having a field for a description of an item enhances the discovery, because you don't necessarily have to know the title of something. You can use a different field to locate the item. And the same fields, if you have things that if you have more fields like abstracts and so forth, this can also lead into analysis as well. The comparison of collections or items to one another to see if this one speaks about this one speaks about that. So it streamlines the process. You don't need to go through each individual object if it's described properly. You can use the metadata to be able to compare it for analysis purposes as well.
Okay. All right, here's another question. Can you elaborate on what you mean by digitizing to free up space on the prose answer?
Can you repeat that question?
So can you elaborate on what you mean by digitizing to free up space on the prose answer?
Oh, okay. So yeah, basically what I mean is, let's say we have newspapers that are in print format from 1900 to 1945. Obviously, we'll have stacks of newspapers in the stack room allocated towards that space, like physical space, to say maybe this shelf that is maybe 5 meters long is housing those newspapers from 1940 to 1945. However, we can literally take those newspapers, especially if they are close to being damaged, for preservation purposes, scan them and store them on our deep archive on the cloud. And then if they are damaged, then, or if there is approval, then we may dispose of the physical items if we have the digital ones. But that's what it helps with as well. It enhances that. You don't have to keep unreadable materials in your library. If you can scan whatever is left there, you scan it and you preserve it, and it also frees up your space, especially if strategically that item is identified as one that can only be stored digitally.
Okay, thank you very much, Setlabo. I think that's all for our Q&A this morning. And Setlabo, we really appreciate your participation in this metadata on digitization webinar. And we thank all the participants who joined us today, and for all the questions that we have received. And with that, we're closing off our webinar, and we thank you very much for your participation. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.